Let's go back in vintage history. Classic cinema TV. Wendy's Classic Corner. Wendy's Classic Corner.
Hello, welcome to Wendy's Classic Corner. I'm Wendy, and today I want to talk about one of the most famous actors from the golden age of Hollywood, the suave and sophisticated Cary Grant. I want to start out by mentioning that if you missed any of our shows, you can always catch all our episodes on my YouTube channel, Wendy's Classic Corner. You can also do a search for Wendy's Classic Corner on PCTV21.org under the Watch Live tab. If you are interested in appearing on the show to talk about classic film, please follow me on my Wendy's Classic Corner Facebook page. Now to our main attraction, the legendary Cary Grant. The name Cary Grant just conjures up this charming, funny, debonair leading man with perfectly slicked back hair and tailored suits. But who was the real Cary Grant? You may be surprised to learn that Cary Grant, born Archibald Leach, had a rather horrible childhood. He grew up in a working-class family in Bristol, England, with an alcoholic father and a mentally unstable mother who had lost her eldest child at the age of 1 and had become neurotically overprotective of Cary as a result. However, his mother would encourage him in the musical arts, particularly song, dance, and piano, and would take him to the cinema frequently. Unfortunately, when Cary was 9, his father placed his mother in a mental institution and told Cary she had left the family and later that she had actually died. Cary never found out the truth about his mother until he was 31 years old, and he did actually believe she had died. Cary's father would remarry, and Cary would continue with his interest in the theater. He attended a boarding school, but would get himself expelled in order to join an acrobatic and dance troupe called the Pender Troupe at age 14. His father basically signed him over to the troupe by contract until his 18th birthday. The troupe was very popular on the vaudeville circuit and would eventually wind up in the United States. Cary would remain in the United States, working with various troupes and vaudeville acts. He would eventually graduate to Broadway musicals, having enough success to attract the attention of Paramount Pictures, who would sign him to a 5-year contract that would start out his movie career. It was slow going at first, but he was eventually noticed by Paramount star Mae West on the studio lot and cast in a couple of her films, which helped bring attention from other studios. His first big hit was a film called Topper for MGM, which was a screwball comedy and really brought out the best side of Cary Grant. He would go on to excel in other screwball comedies such as The Awful Truth, Bringing Up Baby, and Arsenic and Old Lace, which established his mastery of comedic roles. He would later go on to show a more stylistic, debonair character and was a frequent favorite of Alfred Hitchcock, starring in 4 of his films. However, the 2 movies I want to talk about today showcase a very different Cary Grant. In fact, I prefer when he plays against type in films, as it shows a little more versatility as an actor. The first film I particularly like is a little-known Cary Grant film called Only Angels Have Wings from 1939. It's actually a little surprising that this film isn't more well-known because it has a slew of great supporting actors, and the film is directed by well-known director Howard Hawks and co-stars the charming and funny Jean Arthur. Normally, Jean Arthur and Cary Grant would be a funny and charming pairing, as in a later film, Talk of the Town, but as I mentioned previously, this is not the usual charming and funny Cary Grant. Indeed, when we meet him in the beginning of the film, he appears to be quite a jerk. The film begins with Bonnie, Jean Arthur, stopping by an American port town on her way home. She intends to stay only a short time, but upon meeting Jeff, played by Cary Grant, who is the manager of Baruka Airlines, which is a small company of men who deliver mail through a dangerous and difficult pass in the Andes Mountain. Jeff is not especially kind to Bonnie, though the other guys in the company are thrilled to have an attractive young woman around. Jeff is further demonized when he forces one of his pilots to go and deliver the mail in bad conditions. The pilot winds up crashing and dying, and Bonnie is incensed at Jeff's matter-of-fact attitude about the entire thing. Nevertheless, she is drawn to him and chooses to continue on and is given a room in the hotel where all the pilots live. The flights are always extremely risky, and Jeff mostly forces the pilots to do the mail route even in bad conditions. We find out he was doing this for a particular reason, that his friend Dutchie, who owns the company, desperately needs the money that the mail brings in. Meanwhile, he and Bonnie continue their somewhat fractious relationship. Things become even more complicated with the arrival of a pilot named McPherson and his wife Judy, for several reasons. One, Judy, who is played by Rita Hayworth in one of her earliest roles, is the ex-girlfriend of Jeff, and this is a somewhat unwelcome surprise to both Jeff and Bonnie. Number two, McPherson, who is played by silent film great Richard Bartholomew, is a disgraced pilot who bailed out of an airplane in trouble, which left the mechanic on the flight to die. The dead mechanic just so happens to be the brother of one of the pilots in Jeff's charge, his right-hand man, Kid, played by Thomas Mitchell. McPherson is universally hated because of this and rejected by all the other pilots. Judy is clueless as to why, and no one will enlighten her. Because of his reputation as a coward, McPherson is given the most dangerous missions, including having to pick up a child in need of medical care from an almost impossible location, which he does successfully. Meanwhile, Bonnie is jealous of Judy, and this creates a lot of conflict between her and Jeff. Jeff also has to deal with the difficult task of telling Kid that he can't fly anymore because of his eyesight. We begin to see Jeff has just a hard exterior, but inside he is trying to do the right thing and does care about people. As the film nears the end, there was one last incredibly dangerous mail run that must be performed, and Jeff himself plans to do it because it is deemed too dangerous for anyone else. Bonnie is beside herself and accidentally shoots him in the arm, rendering him unable to fly. McPherson then agrees to do the run despite Jeff telling him it's too dangerous and he doesn't have to do it. Kid decides to go along with McPherson on the run. This film has a very emotional and impactful ending that I would not want to spoil. Cary Grant does an exceptional job of taking the character from an unpleasant, closed-off tyrant to revealing bit by bit the true reason for the guardedness and the true nature beneath, which is actually kind, sensitive, and unselfish. Not only is it wonderfully performed by Cary Grant, but the supporting cast is excellent as well. Specifically, Richard Bartholomew, in a rare talking role, is just absolutely brilliant in this film. The only exception is Rita Hayworth. This was a very early role in her career, and it's quite apparent in the film. It is said that Cary would get very frustrated with her for not being able to produce the proper response while shooting, and in order to get a real response, actually poured pitchers of cold water over her head, which was kept in the film, and you can see it in one scene. I hope you will see this film, Only Angels Have Wings. My second favorite Cary Grant film is, again, a lesser-known film, Father Goose. Again, Cary does a really great job in slowly developing the character and transforming for the better. This character, Walter, is a bit of a shock to any viewers who are used to the immaculately dressed and groomed Cary. Walter is disheveled, rough, belligerent, and generally unpleasant. In fact, at first, it's almost hard to believe this is Cary Grant, until, of course, you hear that distinctive voice. Father Goose from 1964 is set in World War II in the South Pacific. The British Navy is in the area to combat the Japanese and set up a series of coastal watches on the various islands. The watches consist of a man on each island watching for Japanese planes, identifying them, and then reporting back to the British Navy. In the beginning, we see Walter, played by Cary Grant, who is an American that's just kind of bumming around the islands. He is stealing petrol from the British Navy. Commander Frank Houghton, who is played by Trevor Howard, has just lost one of his coastal watchers and realizes that Walter would be a great choice for the job. However, Walter has no interest in this, and as I mentioned before, is quite belligerent. Frank is very clever, though, and manipulates Walter into doing just what he wants by ramming a hole in his boat while they are near the island, giving Walter no choice but to proceed to the island. Walter still has no intention of assisting the Navy until he realizes that Frank has hidden a whole case of whiskey all around the island and will only reveal the location of the bottles for confirmed plane sightings. Walter is also a drunkard and wants the whiskey, so he is forced to cooperate. The exchanges between Cary Grant and Trevor Howard in this film are quite hilarious, and they work really well off each other. In fact, Cary Grant is funnier in this film with his caustic and sarcastic comments than in any other comedy that I've seen him in. At one point, one of the other coastal watchers is in jeopardy, and Frank needs Walter to go and get him and bring him to safety on Walter's island. Again, though, he has to use manipulation by telling him that this fellow would be able to fix his boat. Walter agrees and sets off, only to find the man has been killed by a Japanese airstrike. Before he can return, he is confronted by a young woman, Catherine, played by Leslie Caron, who is on the island with 7 young girls. Walter is bullied into taking them all back to his island. Catherine immediately begins to take over the shack and everything else, much to Walter's dismay. Again, the way Leslie Caron and Cary Grant work off each other is perfect. Walter is trying to deal with one determined French woman and a bunch of young girls, and it's absolutely hilarious. You begin to see Walter changing a bit, beginning to care about something other than himself, being protective of the girls. There comes a point when the Japanese come onto the island on patrol, and Walter protects everyone from being seen, often at risk to himself. He also manages to get one of the girls to talk. Catherine had informed him that this girl hadn't spoken since they had been abandoned on the island. You can see the relationship grow with Catherine and the children. Father Goose is a really funny film and shows Cary Grant in a totally different light. In fact, Cary Grant himself said this character was closer to his real personality than any of the others he had played. It was also one of Cary Grant's favorite films. The supporting cast is excellent as well. Both Trevor Howard and Leslie Caron just work wonderfully well with Cary Grant, and the comedic timing and delivery is just marvelous. I can't recommend this film strongly enough. Hello? Sounds good. Send them in. Well, folks, it's time to hear what our viewers have to say. First up, we have Julia, who is visiting us in the studio today. Hello, Julia. What Cary Grant film do you want to talk about today?
Hi, Wendy.
Hi.
The movie I'm going to talk about today is Walk, Don't Run with Cary Grant. It's from 1964. It takes place during the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, and it has a fantastic cast with Jim Hutton, Samantha Eggar, John Standing is in it, and George Takei is in it.
From Star Trek.
Yes,
yeah.
for a little bit. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So, but it is a super cute movie that you just have to see it. If you like Cary Grant's humor, you have to see it. And this is one of the few movies that Cary Grant is not the love interest. He's actually the matchmaker. So, and it was a little bit later in his career, so that makes sense. But the movie starts out with Cary Grant traveling to Tokyo for business, but he comes 2 days early, and of course there's no rooms available in Tokyo because the Olympics are in town. So he winds up trying to, have to go to find his own housing, and he goes to the British Embassy, and this is where he meets John Standing. And John Standing is a officious and obnoxious person. He does a very good job with this character, and he doesn't really help Cary Grant, but he's trying to help him. And so Cary Grant goes into the hallway, and he sees that there is someone had posted on the bulletin board, hey, I have a room to share. So he decides he's just going to go and check it out, and he gets there and meets Samantha Eggar, and she is Miss Christine Eastwood. She's very prim and proper, And so this strange man shows up at her door, and he, is like, well, I want to share the room. And she was like, well, but you're a man, so I didn't plan on that. And he's like, oh, well, in Cary Grant's way, he talks his way into the apartment and talks his way into letting her rent the room to him, which she is not happy about, but of course it's Cary Grant, so she goes along with it. And then so the next day he gets up and he goes out to his business meeting, and when he gets there he runs into Jim Hutton, and Jim Hutton is actually with the U.S. Olympic team, but he's an architect by trade, and so he's in Tokyo to view the architecture, and he's with a friend of his who is on the Russian Olympic team, and they're taking pictures of this building. And so the manager of the building is, what's going on? They have security there, and so Cary Grant is like, okay, well, let's just explain to them why you're here, and they go just through that. We're here for the Olympics, and Cary Grant identifies with him because he reminds him so much of him when he was a young man. And so he finds him interesting and decides to follow him around.
Stalker.
Yes. And so following him around, he learns more about him and what kind of a person he is. And Jim Hutton, since he's in town 2 days early, he has nowhere to stay either. So he's like, oh, well, maybe I could stay with you. And Cary Grant is like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work out. But he's like, well, you can leave your stuff at my apartment while you go out and look for an apartment. And so he goes back to the apartment. He's like, this is a nice place. And look, there's an extra couch. And so he literally talks his way into Cary Grant letting him sublet his half of the room. And Miss Christine Easton comes home. She is not amused at all. This is not going to work. And of course, what happens? She lets them stay there because, of course, they're the same person, but they're just years apart. So the next day, hilarity ensues with them. A classic Cary Grant movie. Hilarity ensues with all of the issues with trying to all get into the shower at the same time when they're not getting their coffee. And so it's just a super, super cute movie. And like I said, Cary Grant, in this role, he plays the matchmaker, which he is very good at, obviously. And it's just a great movie to see. It has a great cast, and the music is done by Quincy Jones. So it has a cute, uplifting whistle throughout the whole movie, but it's a really cute movie. So
yeah, I haven't actually seen this movie, but this sounds exactly like a remake of The More the Merrier. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but it's exactly the same premise, except it's Jean Arthur and Joel McCrea.
Oh no, I haven't.
Yeah, but
seen
it's
that
I believe if you look into it, I believe this is probably a remake, because what you're describing, I mean, there's no Olympics, but what you're describing is the exact same plot.
Yeah.
So I can imagine if it is, The More the Merrier is one of my favorite movies. So I'm sure that if that's the same thing, it has to be adorable.
Yes, it
so
is.
I'm
super cute.
going to run home and see it. I actually have the DVD at my house, so I'm going to run home and see it. And Julia, I want to thank you so much for sharing this film with us today. And next up, we have our friend and frequent guest, Kirk. Hi, Kirk. Which Cary Grant film would you like to discuss today?
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for having me back again. The movie I want to talk about today is Charade.
Awesome.
Directed by Stanley Donen, 1963. This movie stars Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. Audrey is a woman. Starts out, she's on a vacation in the Swiss Alps the French Alps, with her family, her sister and her nephew. And you find out that she's about to get divorced. Her and her husband are kind of estranged already. They were never really that close. They really never loved each other. On this trip, she briefly meets Cary Grant, plays a character named Peter Joshua. It's a brief meeting, but you see the real connection there already. When she returns home to France, she finds out her husband has died, kind of mysteriously, and she discovers that there is a lot more to him than she knew. He had this kind of secret life that she had no idea, and turns out there's an amount of money that he had or was owed. She's not really sure, and now the responsibility for that and the burden of that is on her. People start kind of coming out of the woodwork from her husband's past life. Walter Matthau is in this movie. He plays a CIA connection, kind of brings her in and gives her the rundown of what her husband was up to. James Coburn and George Kennedy are among the characters who come back from his past and are kind of after her now because she's the one obviously who has the money since her husband didn't have it, but she doesn't know what they're talking about, what this is all about. It's all a complete blur to her. So she reconnects with Cary Grant's character in France, who's really at first the only person she thinks she can trust. But that kind of starts to unravel, and it's hard to talk about a lot because the mystery starts to unravel right away. So I can't talk too much about it, but it's a really, really fun movie.
Well, what about, like, I found like that first scene, I think right off the bat when you see Cary and Audrey together, like they have this like automatic like banter immediately between them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, it works really well. They work really well together.
They really do. And what's interesting is that Cary Grant didn't want to do this movie. And that's, the reason I love that is because I love Audrey Hepburn. I know you love Audrey.
Yes.
One of the big problems with Audrey's movies is that she always ends up tied to these very old men who you're kind of questioning, like, would there really be that spark there? And Cary didn't understood that.
Yeah.
And I love that about him because to me, that's that level of self-awareness in leading man. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm Cary Grant. Who cares? Any woman's going to want me." He saw the writing on the wall. He knew he was too old. He didn't want to do it. And Audrey was actually one of the people who talked him into doing this film.
Well, he was very sensitive about the age difference, and I think that the screenwriters actually they would work with him throughout the process of the entire film, just saying if there was something he felt uncomfortable with because of the age gap or something, they would take it out of the script for him.
Absolutely, yeah. You see it's reflected in the script, in the story, where Audrey is kind of, there's that attraction here, and he's pushing her away. I'm too old for you. This is silly. And I mean, you still get that Audrey Hepburn thing where she ends up pursuing an older man, but the fact that he's not the one, starting the relationship. He's not the one pursuing it. And the fact that he's, again, that self-awareness, I think makes it a lot more palatable than it does some other movies.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this film, because Audrey is just like completely clueless as to what's happening for the whole movie. She's like, what's going on? And you have these really interesting people coming in, like James Coburn, for example. I just thinking about the scene where he's like throwing match after match after match on her, and like they're just absolutely terrorizing her. Talk a little bit about like the performances of some of these, like you said, George Kennedy, James Coburn.
Yeah, I mean the three of them, you got three Oscar winners right there, Coburn, George Kennedy, Walter Matthau, and they're all so great. I love the way they shoot Kennedy and Coburn specifically. There's a scene at her husband's funeral where you get a lot of crane shots over the head, and it makes Coburn look like he's 7 foot tall. He looks like a giant. He's so intimidating. And then George Kennedy walks in. He's the width of the door, the church door. He's a monster in this movie. He's missing hay. He has a hook for a hand. He's a real scary individual. So even though this movie is a little lighter, a little more playful, the two of them bring a lot of gravitas to it. And Walter Matthau is a character who most of his scenes are on the phone. He's connecting to her through the phone. And it's not a very heavy comedic performance, but he's always bringing something really subtle to it. Like he's either eating or he's exercising. There's always this level of like physical comedy to his performance, even though he's not given that much to do, at least in the first half of the movie. Again, don't want to talk too much about his character because don't want to give it away, but it's a really fun, subtle performance.
This is like twist upon twist upon twist upon twist in this movie. They call this movie the most Hitchcock-like movie that was not made by Hitchcock. Like, why do you think that this movie specifically is said about this film?
I think it's because you have this lighter, romantic comedy type of movie. I always say it's like if you took Roman Holiday and dropped it in the middle of a Hitchcock movie, because you have that, like the love story, the kind of the hidden identity aspects of that, but you also have this thriller aspect to it, where even though you have the lighter moments of the two of them together, you still have the scarier moments of you have the fight scenes, you have the chase scenes, things like that. So it brings a lot together really well.
Yeah, this movie is absolutely adorable. One of my favorite movies, and a movie in the public domain, I believe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it was just like they forgot to dot an I or cross a T or something real subtle that they it just by mistake it ended up in the public domain.
yeah, it's nice for us folks.
Yeah,
you
real
know.
easy to find. Yeah.
But yeah, this is a movie I definitely recommend. I mean, you can't go wrong with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn together. And I thank you so much, Kurt. It's
Yeah,
always
absolutely.
a pleasure to see you. And last but not least, we have Louis joining us in the studio. Hi, Louis. What film do you have for us?
Wendy, I'm going to talk about 1959's film North by Northwest,
Awesome.
directed by Alfred Hitchcock. It's an amazing, suspenseful film, and I first learned about it when I was walking through a favorite video store of mine. Saw the poster of Cary Grant determined running away in the middle of an open field with a biplane chasing him. And I had no idea what this movie was about, so I had to rent it, checked it out, and wow, it is one of Hitchcock's finest suspense films. It starts out with an opening credit scene that's frenetic with a Bernard Herrmann score that is equally frenetic. It details all the busyness and hustle and bustle of New York City, where we see advertising executive Roger O. Thornhill, played by Cary Grant, walking to a business meeting with a secretary in tow. He's going to the club, and when he gets there, he's mistaken for another man named George Kaplan, at which point he's then pulled away by gunpoint by two henchmen and taken to an estate outside of the city. There, he's grilled by veteran British actor James Mason, who's convinced he is this mysterious George Kaplan. Cary Grant has no idea, but plays it so tongue-in-cheek and coolly that they have no reason to believe he is anybody other than Kaplan. They then arrange his death with a stolen car, and they try to get him for drunk driving. He's arrested, he's saved, but nobody believes him. They go back to the property the next day. They can't find anybody that was there the night before. But as the car pulls away with Cary Grant, we see one of the henchmen is actually there trimming the hedges. So from that point, the film goes on to a series of locations from New York to Chicago to the middle of a cornfield with Cary Grant trying to find out who this mysterious George Kaplan is. The bad guys chasing him through just by people on foot, by planes, by cars. The police are after him because Cary Grant's character gets accidentally involved in a murder inside, of all places, the United Nations. As we go along, we find out that Cary Grant is now working with a government agency against James Mason and his thugs. While he's on a train trying to get to Kaplan's next destination, he winds up meeting Eve Kendall, played by Eva Marie Saint. And an interesting part about this is that when the script was originally written, that part was written for Grace Kelly. But by the time casting came around, she had already ascended to the throne as Queen of Monaco. So then we're on the train and we're going to South Dakota, and we're going to Chicago. We get there, they can't find Kaplan, but Eve Kendall's character directs Cary Grant's character to the middle of a cornfield to meet Kaplan. And when he's there, this is about halfway through the film, that's where that exciting and suspenseful plane chase takes place. Another fun fact, that was actually shot nowhere near Chicago. It was shot out in Bakersfield, California, and was all the idea of Alfred Hitchcock, because he had this idea to shoot a scene with 360 degrees with nothing in sight. And they even planted that cornfield. It's completely made up, but it looks so real.
It does.
It's amazing.
It is.
And so once Cary Grant survives that, he heads on to South Dakota, Kaplan's next location. And while he's en route, and once he gets there, he finds out that Eve Kendall is actually working for an American counterintelligence agency, trying to stop James Mason's character. She's ultimately found out. They come up with a cover story to fake Thornhill's death, but he finds out that Kendall has been discovered by James Mason to be his enemy. So he escapes his hospital, gets to James Mason's property, and from that point, they decide to escape, but there's only one way to go. And that, dear readers, I will not reveal the ending, but I will tell you it is a true cliffhanger.
Thanks, Louis. Always appreciate your reviews. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. I've really enjoyed talking about Cary Grant with you, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed the show. And remember, if you want to be a guest on the show, you simply have to follow Wendy's Classic Corner on Facebook or email me at wendysclassiccorner@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Wendy from Wendy's Classic Corner saying so long, and here's looking at you, kid.
Why go anywhere else for classic movies?